This is the story of the immortal block. Why Ford had to kill the 300 Inline-Six. Pop the hood of a modern pickup and you will see a mess of plastic, sensors, and fragile aluminum. They are built to break, but for 30 years, American engineers built a weapon of mass construction. It was a heavy-duty tractor engine shoved into a civilian pickup truck. It had 7 main bearings locking it down like a bank vault. It used solid steel timing gears instead of cheap rubber belts. It is a mathematical fact that this engine can run without oil longer than a modern engine can run with oil. But if this heavy metal masterpiece was truly unbreakable, why did the executives order it scrapped? The truth is not just about emissions or fuel economy. Did Ford kill the greatest engine ever built simply because it refused to die? Set a straight 6 on the bench and you are looking at the most perfectly balanced machine ever dropped into a pickup. The Ford 300 does not just run smooth by accident, it is a rolling physics lesson, a masterclass in force cancellation that Detroit forgot how to teach. 6 pistons, all in a row, all moving in a mirrored dance, 3 up while 3 come down. Each one's motion cancels out the violence of its neighbor. That is not marketing, that is math. Here is the trick. In a straight 6, the pistons are paired off, front to back, moving in perfect opposition. When piston 1 rises, piston 6 falls. 2 and 5, 3 and 4, each set balancing the other like a row of steel hammers swinging in time. The crankshaft does not twist itself into a pretzel like it does in a V8. There is no sideways shake, no rocking couple trying to rip the block off its mounts. Every force vector finds its twin and wipes itself out. That is what engineers call zero net force. That is what a machinist calls a block that never cracks. V8s need heavy counterweights and still shudder at high revs. V6s are worse, rocking so hard they need balance shafts just to survive. But the 300's geometry is destiny. 7 main bearings clamp the crank so tight you could run this thing in a quarry, a lumber mill, or a dump truck for decades. The firing order, 1, 5, 3, 6, 2, 4, spreads torque pulses so evenly that the whole engine feels like a hydraulic ram, not a bag of bolts. You do not need a vibration damper. You do not need a service bulletin. You just need to keep fuel and air moving. Ask any machinist who has torn down a 300 after 500,000 miles. The bearing surfaces look like they just left the Cleveland foundry. The journals are still round, the block is still square. That is not luck. That is the unbreakable logic of the Inline-Six. They do not build them like this anymore, and you are not crazy for noticing. The math, the metal, and the mileage all say the same thing. Balance is the foundation of immortality. The Ford 300 was never meant to be a car engine. This was a tool forged for work, real work, the kind that doesn't care about chrome or quarter-mile times. Every inch of its cast-iron block was built with the attitude of a tractor, not a sports car. In Dearborn, they called it a truck engine, but out on the job site, it was pure industrial hardware. A mechanical mule bred to haul, dig, and pump from sunup to sundown, year after year, without complaint. Torque was the law of the land. Not horsepower at 5,000 revolutions per minute, but grunt that hits you down low, right off idle. The 300 delivered its peak torque up to 283 pound-feet at just 1,600 revolutions per minute. That's not an accident. That's a statement of purpose. Ford's engineers didn't chase redline glory. They built an engine that could pull a loaded grain truck out of a muddy field or spin a cement mixer through a winter freeze. The long stroke, the heavy crank, the 7 main bearings, every decision was made for one reason: to move heavy things slowly forever. This is the DNA you find in tractors and bulldozers, not commuter cars. The 300's cast iron head and block soak up heat and abuse the way a steel anvil shrugs off a hammer. You can run it hard, run it hot, run it dry, and it keeps coming back for more. It doesn't care if you're hauling hay, running a generator, or plowing snow at 20 below. The engine's whole identity is wrapped around the idea that work never stops, and neither should the machine. Ask a machinist what matters, and you'll hear about bearing surface, oil flow, and journal size. The 300 was built like the world was going to end, and only the toughest engines would survive. It's not nostalgia to say they don't build them like this anymore, it's a fact. The 300 didn't just power trucks, it powered America's work ethic. That's not a metaphor. That's the difference between a truck that lasts 10 years and one that outlives its owner. Lay a Ford 300 crankshaft on the bench and you can see it for yourself. The thing looks like it belongs in a locomotive, not a pickup. 7 main bearings, each one the width of a man's thumb, clamp down on that forged steel like a bank vault. Most engines make do with 5. Ford gave the 307 spaced so tight you would swear they were daring the crank to even think about flexing. Every time a piston hammers down, that force has nowhere to go but straight into the thick iron webbing. No bow, no twist, no fatigue. You could put a dial gauge on the center journal while a 300 idles and the needle hardly moves. That's not marketing. Ask any machinist who has checked one after 300,000 miles. The journals are still round, the surfaces still mirror bright, oil grooves clean enough to eat off. This is what separates a workhorse from a disposable power plant. 7 mains means the crank does not whip under load. No micro cracks sneaking in at the fillets, no slow death by vibration. That is why you do not see 300's spinning rod bearings or snapping cranks even after decades of abuse. It is not magic, it is physics and overkill. The 300's bottom end was built to survive the kind of rotational violence that would turn a modern aluminum block into shrapnel. When you hear old-timers talk about these engines running forever, this is the secret. 7 bearings, forged steel, and enough cast iron to anchor a tugboat, proof that they really did build them better, and you are not imagining it. Drop a magnet on the Ford 300 block, and it clangs like a church bell. Pure, honest cast iron from end to end. No aluminum shortcuts, no plastic covers hiding weak points. This is metal you can trust, thick, heavy, and built to soak up punishment. The cylinder head is cast iron too, not for bragging rights, but for thermal mass. Heat does not scare this engine. It holds steady under load, never warping, never cracking, even when the coolant is boiling and the oil is just a memory. That is the difference between a block that survives a hard summer hauling hay and one that throws in the towel when the going gets tough. Every pound of that cast iron does real work. Sure, it makes the 300 heavier than any modern aluminum block, but weight is not a crime when you are building a power plant for the long haul. That mass means the cylinders keep their shape, the head stays flat, and the gaskets do not blow out under stress. You can run it hot, run it cold, run it dry, iron shrugs it off. Try that with an aluminum engine and you will be shopping for head gaskets or a replacement block before the season is out. Machinists love the 300 for another reason. It is simple to service. The block is thick enough to handle a full rebuild, overbores, new seats, whatever you need. No fragile threads, no stripped holes when you pull a head bolt. You can deck it, sleeve it, weld it, and put it right back to work. That is not nostalgia talking. That is what separates a legend from a landfill. When you are staring at a 300 on the stand, you are looking at a monument to American overkill, cast iron that laughs at time, heat, and abuse. They do not build them like this anymore, and you are not crazy for missing it. Drop your ear to the side of a Ford 300 and you'll hear a sound that modern engines can't imitate. A deep, metallic chatter, like steel teeth marching in lockstep. That's the timing gear set, not a chain, not a belt, but a fortress of solid steel cogs driving cam and crank together in perfect rhythm. No rubber to rot, no links to stretch, no tensioners waiting to fail. Just pure, unyielding gear-on-gear contact, cut straight from the same steel as the block itself. This isn't nostalgia, it's physics. Rubber belts, like the ones strung through today's engines, are designed to fail on a schedule, 60,000, maybe 90,000 miles if you're lucky. Miss a change, and you're walking, pistons slamming into valves, the whole top end trashed in a heartbeat. Chains last longer, but they stretch, rattle, and eventually jump a tooth. Every mechanic's got a horror story about a snapped belt or a slipped chain. But with the 300 Inline-Six, you get none of that drama. The gears mesh, the cam spins, and the timing stays true mile after mile, decade after decade, as long as there's oil in the sump. A machinist can spin those gears on a bench and feel the weight, the cold authority of real steel. You can hit them with a hammer and they'll ring, not shatter. That's why you find 300 Inline-Sixes in irrigation pumps, running around the clock, year after year, with the same timing gears they left the factory with. Modern engines hide their timing behind plastic covers, hoping you won't notice the planned failure lurking inside. The 300 wears its gears like a badge of honor. That is not just durability, it's defiance. They built these engines to outlast the people who drove them, and if that sounds impossible, you're not crazy. The proof is right there, locked in the mesh of steel on steel. Crack open a municipal fleet log from the late 80s and you'll find a story written in grease and graphite, not marketing copy. There's a Ford F-350, engine code E, racking up 326,000 miles before its first major teardown. Next page, a city dump truck with 294,000 on the clock and nothing but routine oil changes, brakes, and tires. These aren't collector trucks, pampered and polished, they're work rigs, hammered from dawn to dusk, hauling gravel, plowing snow, idling through winters so cold the doors freeze shut. The 300 doesn't care, it just keeps turning. Industrial duty wasn't a side gig for this engine. Water pumps on construction sites, wood chippers chewing through logs, airport tugs dragging jetliners, everywhere you look in the records, the same block number shows up. No turbo, no plastic intake, no aluminum head. Just cast iron, 7 mains, and a torque curve flatter than the Midwest. Fleet managers learned to stop budgeting for engine swaps. Mechanics started joking that the 300 would outlast the truck frame, and they weren't wrong. There's a logbook entry from a county highway department, F2 to 50, original 300, 312,000 miles, compression still within spec, cam and crank untouched. The only engine work is a valve job at 220,000. Talk to the old-timers and they'll tell you about backup generators that ran for weeks straight during blackouts, irrigation pumps left running all summer, never missing a beat. No limp home mode, no codes, no sensor drama, just fuel, oil, and the kind of metallurgy you can't buy anymore. This isn't legend, it's written in ink, signed by men who measured value in odometer digits, not warranty periods. When you see that kind of mileage, logged and certified, you realize the 300 wasn't just durable, it was a mechanical fact. If you think they don't build them like this anymore, you're not crazy. The proof is right there, in the fleet logs and the hands of the men who kept them running. There is a legend that hangs over the Ford 300 like a steel halo, a story whispered in garages and passed around truck stops, always with a grin and a shake of the head. It starts with a dare, or maybe just a bad day. A 300 was left to run with no oil in the sump, not for minutes, but for hours. The tale goes that the engine did not seize, did not throw a rod, did not even slow down. It just kept chugging, iron on iron, long after any sensible motor should have surrendered. Some versions say it ran until the radiator boiled dry. Others claim the only thing that finally stopped it was running out of fuel. No one ever seems to have a name, a vehicle identification number, or a shop ticket. But the story refuses to die. Ask around in the right circles and you will hear the same kind of abuse recounted with the solemnity of a campfire myth. A city dump truck, loaded to the springs, idling through a heat wave with the oil pressure light glowing red for half a shift. A farm pickup, forgotten in a hayfield, started cold and run hard with an empty pan, only to limp home under its own power. There is a UPS mechanic who swears that a delivery van with the 300 engine made it back to the depot, bone dry, after a line split on the highway. The driver did not even know until the next morning when the shop drained a cup of metal flakes and topped it off again. The truck went right back en route. Nobody has the lab data. There is no magazine test, no stopwatch, no warranty claim. But the stories pile up, one on top of the next, until they start to feel less like exaggeration and more like a dare to modern engineering. Could you drain the oil from an EcoBoost and expect anything but a tow bill? Would a plastic timing belt V6 last 10 minutes in the same trial by fire? The 300's myth is not about numbers. It is about a reputation earned in the places where engines live or die by the gallon, not the spreadsheet. Maybe it is just a story. Maybe it is a warning. In an age where everything is calculated for just enough, the Ford 300 became famous for being too much, for refusing to quit, even when the odds, the oil, and the engineers said it should have. That is why the legend sticks. Because somewhere, deep down, every machinist and every truck owner wants to believe it is true. By the late 80s, the writing was on the wall. Ford started wiring up the 300 with electronic fuel injection in 1988, squeezing more power and cleaner emissions out of the old iron, but that was just a stopgap. The real move was happening behind closed doors and on the assembly line. Modular engines were coming. Corporate average fuel economy targets kept tightening, and the EPA wanted numbers that the 300's cast iron and long stroke could not deliver. Ford's answer was the modular V8, an all-new lighter overhead cam design that could be built in different displacements off the same line. The 300 overlapped with the modular for a few years, but by 1996, the last straight six rolled off the line. The official story was compliance, fuel economy, emissions, modernity. But when you look at the timeline, you see the old workhorse was being boxed out by a new agenda, lighter engines, more electronics, and a business model built on turnover, not immortality. Run the numbers, and the truth clangs louder than a dropped wrench. A Ford 300 in a fleet truck meant a service bay sitting empty, year after year. Dealer revenue dries up when an engine shrugs off 300,000 miles with nothing but oil and filters. Parts departments hate a legend. They need failures to keep the lights on. The 300's cost per mile was a rounding error. A timing gear here, a gasket there, maybe a valve job at 200,000. Meanwhile, modular V8s and aluminum blocks started marching through the doors with plastic intakes splitting, sensors blinking, timing chains stretching, and coolant leaks at half the mileage. Every breakdown was a payday. The math is simple. A truck that needs nothing kills repeat sales. Warranty repairs vanish. Service tickets drop. In the old days, you built a machine to last a generation. Today, you build one to guarantee the next sale. Ask any machinist, you start making money when the block cracks, not when it keeps running. That is the planned obsolescence playbook. Immortality is bad for business. Look around today. Plastic intakes, aluminum blocks, engines meant to limp out of warranty. You're not crazy. They really did build them better, and the 300 is the proof. A cast iron oath to working class immortality. In an industry that now profits from failure, the death of engines like this is not nostalgia. It is a warning. Some legends die because they refuse to break. Drop your thoughts below if you know what I mean.